Welcome to The Cycle. I am your host, Mia Vasky, and while The Cycle is always about preventing period poverty, it's also about women's well-being and taking the time for your mental health. The holidays are so incredibly stressful. You're shopping, you're in large parties, you're surrounded by people all the time, and it's important to just take a moment for yourself. And to do that, and hear more about how to do that, I spoke with Mallory Callans, a therapist who specializes in eating disorders and body image and self-esteem. So she is going to give us some of the insight of how to make your holiday season just a little bit less stressful. Hi, Mallory. Welcome to The Cycle. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me who you are, what you do.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for having me. My name is Mallory Callans. I'm a mental health therapist in the Atlanta, Georgia area, and I work with both teens and adults. I specialize in body image and eating disorders, but I also do a lot of work with anxiety, depression, OCD, life transitions, and more general things like that as well.
Wow, that's great. And I can imagine that this is the busiest time of year for you. I mean, holidays just bring around so much stress. And
Yeah.
what do you think are the most common triggers that you tend to see?
Yeah, so through the holidays and then for a lot of time after the holidays as well, I end up seeing a lot of people get anxiety and be triggered by the amount of food that they were around the holidays, all the different eating and things like that. Being around family for that long, I see a lot of family stress after arguments or hard conversations, things like that. And then the last thing I see a lot of is a lot of financial stress. It's a really expensive time of year, and that definitely weighs on a lot of people.
Just because there are so many, what do you think are some common, simple steps people can take to just reduce their anxiety, even if they're on a level 8, just even down to a level 6? You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one of the biggest reasons that people get so stressed around the holidays is because they're out of their routine. I think that causes a lot of anxiety. If you already have minor anxiety, being out of your routine is going to increase that to be major anxiety. So I think trying to stay in your routine as much as you can is so important. Whether that's trying to maintain your sleep schedule the best that you can, or trying to maintain how often you exercise. I think those things are super important. And then also just recognizing that you might be triggered by certain people, you might be triggered by certain conversations, and understanding that those triggers are going to come up, and then having a plan of how you deal with them. So some things that I typically recommend is stepping away when you can. I think that's really helpful. If you can say, I've got to go to the bathroom, I'm going to go get another drink. Leaving those conversations when they get really triggering is definitely a helpful thing. Another thing I suggest doing is, if you can, having a support person there for you. So maybe that's your sister, maybe that's a friend or a close coworker, who knows that this person or this topic is triggering. And when that comes up in conversation, they know they can either help you escape the conversation of like, hey, Mia, let's go grab another drink, or they can support you after the conversation is over.
Right. And then how can I be that support person? If I notice a friend or a family member struggling with anxiety, what's the best way to offer support to them?
Yeah, so I always say just be really honest with that person. If you see somebody who you think is struggling or you know might be struggling during this time of the year, just ask them. Say, I see you struggling, or I know this time might be really hard. What can I do to help you? And then they can either answer that question of, I need you to help me prepare for this event that I'm really stressed about, or I need you to be this safe person for me in this setting, where I'm anxious about these like particular triggers or this particular person. And then you can either help them be that safe person, help them maintain boundaries, things like that.
So, kind of going along with that, if I am noticing that maybe this is something more serious, what are some signs to look for? If I'm thinking, oh, this anxiety probably isn't normal, how can I recognize that it's become something like a little bit more of a major anxiety or a depression or OCD or something like that?
Yeah. So I definitely say if it's starting to affect your everyday life, if you're not able to sleep or eat or interact or just exist how you existed maybe before the holidays or before this anxiety, depression, whatever symptoms are coming up for you. If that's the case, then I definitely think it's time to reach out, get some help from a therapist or another type of professional. But I also always say too that like you can never reach out to a therapist too soon. If you're having the question of like, should I reach out to a therapist? I always suggest just trying it. Even if you're just going to work with this person very short term and work on some of your like holiday anxiety triggers, a therapist can support you for a couple weeks or a couple months through the holidays. And then if you don't want to continue through the rest of the year, you don't have to. But on the other side, if you continue through the rest of the year, you can continue to work on this anxiety further and kind of get more coping skills, figure out what the maybe main cause of the anxiety is. And then you might not even have to have seasonal anxiety or seasonal depression. If you can kind of cope to deal with it throughout the whole year and not kind of wait until the end of the year for this to all pick up.
Right. I mean, again, you're saying picking up. What are some intentions people can start setting now to make sure that next year's holiday season is less stressful?
Yeah. So something I definitely recommend doing is kind of spending some time to reflect after the holidays, especially if you struggled, and figuring out what went well and what didn't go well. And those things that didn't go well, start preparing for them early. You have 10 or 11 months to deal with all of these things before the holidays come up. So start seeing a therapist in, I don't know, March or April. You don't have to wait until October, November, December comes around. Like I said, the sooner you start, the more work you can get in, the more practice you can get with your coping skills, things like that. So definitely be proactive. I think that's really important and helpful. And then also just setting some realistic expectations, understanding that the holidays are not going to go perfectly for anybody. There's always going to be a hiccup. There is always going to be some stress and some higher anxiety moments, and that's definitely okay. And I think having those realistic expectations of like things are not going to be perfect. There's going to be hiccups and there's going to be things that go wrong. So having those expectations be more realistic that's going to happen, I think can be helpful. And I also think it allows you and everybody around you to maybe laugh when those expectations don't go exactly perfectly. Because it doesn't have to be the hardest moment of the day. It can be, you can laugh it off, move on a little bit faster when you're expecting things to not be perfect.
And so let's say things aren't going perfect. I've way overscheduled myself. How can I stop that? Can I effectively avoid feeling overwhelmed by my commitments?
Yeah, definitely. I think trying to sit down and understand what your limits are is really important. I think we recognize what our limits are after we've pushed them. So knowing that you're somebody who gets 8 hours of sleep a night, you need to continue that through the holidays. Like I said, when your routine gets out of whack, you get out of whack. So if you're somebody who gets 8 hours of sleep a night, like you don't need to test that theory. You know you need 8 hours of sleep a night. So knowing that about yourself, you're somebody who exercises 3 to 5 days a week, and that's something that's really helpful for you. You don't need to test what it's like without that. So try to maintain that as much as you can, even if it's just going on like a 10-minute walk instead of maybe your 50-minute yoga class or something or Pilates class. It's still, you're still getting movement in with that walk. So I think really trying to like hold your routine strong, not test your limits. You don't need to know if getting 6 hours of sleep works for you when you're somebody who gets 8 or 9. So I think trying to hold those strong, being able to say no to people when they are asking about, can you come to this event that's maybe going to stretch you a little bit too thin? It's okay to say no. It's such a busy time, so don't overextend yourself. But again, I think really knowing those limits and then respecting them is really important.
Right. And you mentioned saying no, but that's very difficult to do. Some people say, gosh, I was here for this family member. I have to be here for this family member. I need to be there for them. How can someone learn to say no very, gracefully, kindly? Because some people will think, oh no, this person might really start hating me if we're not going to be able to meet this year.
Yeah. So I think saying no definitely comes with some practice. So it's never easy to say no, but I think remembering that this is such a busy time for everybody and your loved ones are going to want to love and support you. So being honest with them, saying like, I'm really sorry I can't come to this event. I really would love to, but I really need to be getting some rest at that time because my family gets here the next day or the next week or something like that. So being able to say no, I think is really important, and understanding that like your loved ones, they want to be there for you and they don't want to be mad at you for these types of things, especially through the holidays. So then maybe even saying like, But after Christmas, my family's leaving and I'll have a little bit more time. I would love to get together and celebrate the holidays with you. Can we do December 27th instead of the 23rd, you know? So I think even trying to offer like other time with your loved ones and people that you do want to spend time with, but maybe you just don't have the time between the 23rd to 25th. And those are like the busiest times, I feel.
Right, especially everyone tries to cram everything in before Christmas, but everyone forgets about that little week before New Year's that we're
Yeah.
still off, still everyone's recharging and getting
Yeah.
ready. So, I mean, let's say I'm at this family gathering. This is one I've said yes to. I'm looking forward to it. And the time comes and it's crowded, it's social, and I'm feeling anxious. Are there any specific strategies for this to like feel, less stressed?
Yeah, definitely. So a couple things that I definitely recommend is having like consistent check-ins with yourself, even if that's every 5 or 10 minutes of like you are taking a second to think just to yourself. You don't have to step away, but just thinking to yourself, like, has my anxiety increased? Do I feel like my heart rate is going faster, or I'm having some of these racing thoughts, or whatever those symptoms of your anxiety are? But taking a second to check in with yourself and understand where you're at when it comes to anxiety, even if you have to kind of track that on a scale. So maybe at one check in, your anxiety was at a 3, and then you check in 10 minutes later, and now it's at a 7. What happened? So just checking in, recognizing what happened, your anxiety is a little bit higher, and then doing whatever you need to do to help your anxiety go down a little bit. Like I said, maybe you have those coping skills, maybe you step away. There's different like grounding and coping skills, whether that's taking deep breaths, or another common one that a lot of people have heard of is like, what are 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, things like that, and kind of going through all your senses. So whether it's doing a breathing exercise or a grounding skill, stepping away, using a support person, I think those things are all really helpful for people.
And let's say they know it's this one, a little bit more of a difficult family member that kind of tends to just start skyrocketing their anxiety. What's the best way to kind of deal with that, do you think?
Yeah. So beyond having a safe person who can either rescue you or support you around this triggering person, I think setting boundaries is really important. I think people are really scared when they hear that phrase, setting boundaries, because it sounds like it's got to be this like scary confrontational conversation with somebody. But I always say that boundaries should be and can be really, really kind. You don't have to have this scary confrontation where you're angry or yelling or being really stern with somebody. It can be a really, really kind and gentle statement. And something that I try to teach my clients to help them with this is an acronym called SET. So that's SET. And it stands for support, empathy, and truth. And it's kind of like an equation that you use to build a boundary statement. So an example of one is, let's say you and your aunt really struggle around the holidays or anytime you're together when politics come up. You guys disagree. It's really triggering for you, really uncomfortable. But you still love this aunt or you still have to be around this aunt. So an example of that set acronym for a situation like this would be, I appreciate you and our relationship so much. That's the support sentence. I know it feels really hurtful and frustrating for you when we disagree about politics, and it feels that way for me too. That's the empathy sentence. This is something we can't keep talking about together. I value our relationship. So when you bring up politics, I'm going to step away from the conversation. And that's just to protect our relationship because I love you. And that's that truth part of I'm going to walk away when politics comes up. And then holding that boundary strong. When politics comes up, you can even give your aunt a little smile or a little wink before you step away to kind of connect with her. But then you have to step away or you have to leave that conversation, whatever that looks like. So trying your best to hold those boundaries strong after you've set them is really important. But yeah, again, I think the boundary piece is really important. And I know it feels scary for people, but it can be such like a kind and gentle statement that you don't even have to use the word boundary when you're setting it.
Right. And I think especially the word boundary has become such a word that means I'm going to stand up to you and tell you no, no, no. And it's going to be this very scary thing. But I like that how you do it with the support and the empathy. And I think that's really important because, it's not a family member you disagree with. It's a family member that you have a relationship with. It's someone that you're going to still want to be around, just not talking about that particular subject, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I really like that SET acronym, and I think it's even helpful, even if I'm saying no, like truth is no, I won't be able to make it that day. Let's reschedule. And I think that I love that. That's really applicable to a lot of things. I mean, I can already see a bunch in just my head, and I think it's really important to remember that your family is there for you, and they just want to see you do your best. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say too, if somebody is responding to this very kind and gentle boundary that you're setting in a negative way, that's definitely a reason to look at that relationship. Like that example that I just gave, where you're saying like, I love you, our relationship is so important to me, I'm trying to protect it. If you're trying to do that by preemptively setting this boundary and the person's having a really negative response, that's definitely something to take a look at with that person.
I think it's definitely difficult to go into the holiday season, worried for all of the, financial obligations and the people. But what role does gratitude play in managing the anxiety? Does it play a role in it? Is it something to consider? I mean, of course, everyone says around the Thanksgiving table, what are you thankful for? But I think gratitude goes further than that. Do you think that has any effect on anxiety?
Absolutely. Having gratitude practices is something that I work on with a lot of my clients, especially around the holidays. So it definitely is something that can be really helpful. And I think it can be helpful for all of those common triggers that I mentioned at the beginning, the food, the family, and the finances. It definitely can be helpful to practice gratitude with all of those things. For some people, that might look like maybe when they wake up in the morning, they're thinking about some things they're grateful for before they go to bed at night, or when they're driving over to their Christmas dinner with their whole family or something like that. They're just thinking about it. Can things can look like that. And sometimes too, that is even thinking about a situation that maybe is really hard for you. Maybe that's the family piece. Maybe you struggle with some of your family relationships and a little bit anxious about these triggering situations coming up. Might even have to be just like thinking of like, okay, I really don't get along great with my sister, or I don't get along great with my parents. But I am really grateful that we're all healthy. I'm grateful that we're all going to be able to be together. I'm grateful for maybe the 3 positive moments we have, even if there's going to be like one really bad one. I'm grateful for like the moments before that or after that. Trying to be grateful for those things, I think, is really important. Or even if that's something that's not possible for you, being grateful for the people you have who are your support people. So maybe it's, I know my parents and I are not going to get along at all. And I'm anxious about seeing them. And I'm really grateful that my sister is going to be there to support me through that.
I love that. It's looking for the light in a little bit of a more stressful time to just remind yourself that this is supposed to be fun. This is supposed to be a happy season, off work, off school, and time to reset and recharge with family. So keeping it as stress-free as possible, even when some family members are being difficult, is a really good reminder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me, Mallory. It really does mean a lot.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for having me.
Thank you again to our guest, Mallory, and thank you for listening. This is truly going to be a great year, and hopefully one that is way less stressful than this. We have a few amazing events coming up planned, starting even as soon as January 8th at the Face It Botox Bar in Fort Myers. We hope to see you all there. It's a product drive. Be sure to bring something to contribute. And if you want to find out more about other events and where we're going to be sure to check the Cycle Instagram at the Cycle SWFL and the Cycle website for all of the current happenings. Have a happy new year and a Merry Christmas.
Baby, it's cold outside.